to episode 119 of the Various and Sundry podcast. I am your host, Matt Harmon, joined live from the Vault Studio on the beautiful campus of Grace College and Theological Seminary by my good friend, my colleague, my co-host, and the man who is hosting more events than any of you are this week, John Scott Sloat.
Yeah, event hosting.
Yeah.
Being responsible to get people to things when you have no control over whether they get there or not is the bane of my existence.
The bane?
I despise it.
Okay. Yes. They're good events, though. Let's clarify that.
Yeah, they're good events.
Yeah. I mean, this is, not something that is unenjoyable or unimportant, but just, the weight rests heavy upon your shoulders this week.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Glad we have Friday off. That'll be nice.
Yeah.
And then next week we're out of town. We're going on a trip.
We are. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. But do you have Easter plans? Like what?
Dinner at my folks' house.
Okay.
So headed up that way.
Gotcha.
The Goshen way.
Yes.
How about yourself?
We will go to Ohio to see my family for the day.
Okay.
So, yes, indeed. If you'd like to contact the show, you can find us on Twitter at VNSPod. You can email the show, variousandsundrypodcast@gmail.com. We are on Facebook and on YouTube, Various and Sundry Podcast. And we would greatly appreciate, on whatever platform you access the show, leaving a 5-star rating and a review.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't checked if we've gotten enough on Spotify, so this is a special request for our Spotify listeners. I know some of you have rated the show and gotten the message of the show hasn't received enough ratings to show the actual aggregate of that. So if you're a Spotify listener, please do us a solid that direction. So,
and I'm checking Apple right now. I don't have Spotify, so
I checked yesterday and there were no new reviews.
Okay, so you're already ahead of this. All right,
I think we've got that covered. John, it was a busy weekend in sports.
Oh boy, was it!
Yeah. So you want to start a little Masters?
Yeah, Masters. Scotty Scheffler.
Yeah.
Won and was way ahead.
Yeah. There were a couple moments in the final round where the lead shrunk down to like 2 or 3, but it never felt like it was
out of hand.
Out of hand,
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I know nothing about him. Do you know anything about Scotty?
Just that he's been on a tear, and I think he's now the number 1 ranked golfer in the world. He's 25.
Wow.
And again, I know how much you love the merging of athletics and Christianity.
Oh boy!
But there was a tweet where of a snippet from the post-tournament press conference where he openly talked about his faith in Christ.
Oh well, good,
and not in a Tebow way. Probably,
yeah, it's the Tebow way that bothers me. the sort of positivism, Christianity, athletics sort of thing.
No, it was actually very good because. I forget what the question was, but basically he talked about how his identity is not found in being an elite golfer.
Yeah.
It was really good. Just grounded in it's like my goal out there is to glorify God, and my wife constantly reminds me my relationship with God is what matters most, that I'm secure in Him, and that frees me up to play, in a way that's not putting undue pressure on myself.
Mm-hmm.
So, did you see the guy he was paired with on the last day?
I did not.
Cameron
No.
Smith. Have you?
Okay.
He looks more like a baseball player, and what I mean by that is he's got the long hair. So you're wearing the baseball, like the cap, and so you get the long. He looked like he could stroll out onto the mound at at any baseball stadium. He had that kind of look, and he had not quite the dirty stash, but like the stash. It was an interesting look he was rocking there. But apparently he's like won 2 or 3 tournaments already this year as well. So
wow.
the changing of the guard. And, of course, Tiger. That was a big story. Tiger made the cut.
Made the cut and did so pretty well. I think he was 1 over after 2 days, 2 over maybe.
Yes. And then he had a rough weekend.
Yeah, I think his injuries caught up with him a little bit.
Yeah, you could tell. I mean, was that car accident a year ago?
14 months.
Okay.
I heard it this morning. 14 months ago.
And before that, he was recovering from back surgery.
Mm-hmm.
So just the fact that he was able to make the cut is impressive. I mean, I know Tiger's not a guy who's like moral victory kind of guy, but I mean, realistically, it was impressive.
Yeah.
It was, yeah. And
and for the first day, he was in the mix. You know, he was within striking distance.
So the NBA regular season has come to an end. Play-in tournament begins on Tuesday.
When this drops, right?
Yes. So how do you feel about the NBA play-in tournament?
Honestly, I just had up my app looking at the standings, and it changes. I have to like reorient myself because I'm used to seeing like that dotted line underneath the 8th seed, sort of saying these teams get in, and now it's like a dotted line. What is it? Under 6 and
So in the Eastern Conference, this episode will drop April 12th, Tuesday, April 12th. So you've got the Cavs, the 8th seed, against the Brooklyn Nets, which is so crazy to think, like talent-wise.
Oh, yeah.
You know, the Nets are arguably one of the most talented teams in the East, and yet here they are in the 7th. So the winner of that game gets the 7th seed between the Cavs and the Nets. They lock in their spot. The loser then plays the winner of the Hornets and the Hawks, the 10 versus the 9. And then the winner of that second game gets the 8th spot. So, and then in the West, you've got Clippers versus the Timberwolves for the 7th seed, and then the loser of that game will play the winner of the Spurs and Pelicans game. So, I mean, my interest is in the Cavs. I mean, the fact that they made the playoffs is a big deal, and even in the Nets, because that's a team that if they figure it out, like they could win the East.
Yeah, and are they healthy?
I don't know that Ben Simmons has played yet.
If they could get Ben Simmons back or at all and remain healthy and get hot, they can make a run.
When you've got Kyrie and KD, I mean, you can make a run.
Mm-hmm.
So that'll be interesting to see. Noticeably missing from the playoffs, the Los Angeles Lakers and LeBron James.
Yeah.
Talk about a dumpster fire that season has been for them.
And they just fired their coach Monday morning.
Not surprising at all.
Mm-hmm.
That the season looked doomed pretty early on between accumulating an all-star team from like 2013.
Maybe even before that. Yeah.
And then you add injuries, and that had no chance. Baseball's begun.
Yeah. It's been fun.
So how are the Mets doing? I have not paid one bit of attention.
The Mets opened a 4-game series in Washington, and we won 3 of 4, which is what you want.
Yes.
And today we start a 3-game set in Philly, and so that should be a lot of fun also. Philadelphia. Do you know much about the Philadelphia Phillies this year?
No, not this year.
Okay. So they've loaded up on a bunch of guys that are great bats, great offensive talents, but can't play any defense whatsoever.
Okay.
And so kind of the joke is Phillies are going to find a way to win games 13-12,
So they're trying the like church softball league approach.
Basically. Although I don't does church softball still limit the number of home runs you can hit in a game?
I don't know.
Okay.
It's been years since I've played. I think I played one season.
So yeah, that's the Phillies. But the Mets, they look good. They've put, I think their lowest total was 2 runs in a game, and that was the game they lost. So everything else had 4 or more runs, I believe. Pitching all looked really, really good, and off to a good start. It's a lot of fun. I'm winning my fantasy baseball matchup for the first week of the season here.
Okay.
against the guy that won our bracket challenge.
Yes. I did speak with him last night, actually.
Yeah. Did you? Okay.
I did. So we've confirmed what book
What did he choose?
He chose Rebels and Exiles.
Good for him.
Now, in fairness, he said, well, the only book of yours I have already is asking the right questions. So he's like, I don't know. Which one do you think I should get? So
Okay.
I kind of steered him that direction.
Yeah.
But
I'm beating him pretty good right now in fantasy baseball. Hopefully
Okay.
that continues.
yeah,
That's a little revenge tour for me.
there you go. Yeah, Grant's a good dude.
Yeah.
And then on a much sadder sports note this weekend, Dwayne Haskins, former Ohio State quarterback.
Won the national championship?
No.
No.
Nope.
He
Nope.
did not.
Only started one season at Ohio State.
Okay.
Did not win a national title, but put up like stupid, crazy numbers. Like he was sort of the transition figure from the Urban Meyer to the Ryan Day offense, and he threw like 50 touchdown passes in a college season, like crazy numbers. And that has helped accelerate Ohio State's quarterback recruiting when, high school quarterbacks are like, where can I go? I'm going to get to throw the ball a lot. Now they see, well, Ohio State's going to throw the ball a lot.
Yeah.
So, tragically passed away at age 24, hit by a dump truck, I understand, trying to cross a busy interstate or highway or something like that. The details still feel a little
Yeah.
uncertain. to
Early
me.
in the morning, from what I understand.
Like 6:30 in the morning.
Yeah. And any time life is lost this young, it's really, really sad.
And he's 24. He would have turned 25 next month. And that hit me a little bit this weekend. When you've got a kid that age, when you have a son who's that age, and you think there's a family that lost a son the same age as my son is.
Yeah.
That's hard. But yeah, he's on the Steelers, and so was down in Florida, working out with some teammates, getting ready for the season, and just tragic.
Yeah.
So, I don't know that there's any easy way to transition on. Do you?
No.
Do you have anything else in the sports?
I don't think so. That seems to pretty much cover it from the
Oh,
weekend.
there was something about the Masters I wanted to talk about. Did you?
Yeah.
So, of course, the beauty of Twitter is if you want to go somewhere to find out what you should be upset about, there's no better place than Twitter. Like if you're looking for what should I be outraged about right now?
If you're looking for something to be outraged about, you can find it on Twitter. Yeah.
Without question. But I was watching at this point when Rory McIlroy, who shot like a 64 on the last day, which is like, if you're not a golf person, like
Wow.
a great round.
Yeah.
He holed out from the bunker on 18 to finish his round.
Oh, cool.
So, people were crushing CBS because they're showing another shot. They're showing a guy lining up a putt. And Nick Faldo says, I can't believe what I just saw. And they haven't shown it yet. And so he's like, I'm not going to spoil it, but you're not going to believe what we're about to show you. Well, of course that spoils it, right? Like, then they cut to Rory and you're like, oh, he's hitting a bunker shot. Well, gee, I wonder if it's going to go in. Like, and so people on Twitter, of course, were crushing him for spoiling that moment.
But what if it was totally different? Like, what if he's hitting this bunker shot and he hits a bird? As it's like flying, as it's like clearly going to be very close to the hole, it hits a bird, or an alligator comes up and swallows it whole, or
Yeah, I think it's more of you understand you can't watch everything simultaneously. So
Sure.
You're not going to capture everything live on a golf tournament. There's just way too many things going on.
Mm-hmm.
So inevitably, you're going to have those moments where, and if you're watching golf, you hear it, right? Like you're watching one thing and a guy's lining up for a putt or a shot, and then you hear the roar from another hole, and you're like, oh, something big happened there.
Yeah.
So even that can be a little bit of a spoiler, but yeah, just
I always imagine all these. There's hundreds of cameramen. There's got to be multiple producers, and there's got to be a guy in a truck making a call of when do we switch from guy to guy.
oh
right?
yeah.
guy that has a long approach, that comes to the ball and stands over it for like 15 to 20 seconds. I just imagine the producer in the truck just losing his mind the entire time. Hit the ball. Just hit it already. We've missed 2 other shots.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. So, yeah, golf would not be an easy sporting event to produce like that.
Yeah.
A lot of moving parts. With football or even basketball, smaller space, you have different camera angles. But for basketball in particular, it's
just one event.
You pretty much stay – everyone's participating in the same action at the same time.
And there's one ball to follow.
Exactly. Yes.
Where in golf, everybody brings their own, know.
Yeah. That's true. All right. We should move on. Let's talk about our main topic for today, which is Young, Restless, and Reformed.
Mm-hmm.
And let's talk first. Part of the reason we're talking about this is next week is the final Together for the Gospel Conference being held in Louisville, which I was looking on their website the other day and discovered that they've reached the max capacity, so you cannot –
Oh, really?
You can't –
No more tickets?
No more tickets available.
Okay.
But they're going to live stream for free.
Oh, wow.
All of the messages. So that's next week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday.
And we'll be there.
We will.
With 18 dear friends.
Yeah. Yes, we will. So
18 students. That's ultimately what I mean. Yeah.
Exactly. All right. So so we'll talk a little bit about that. But what drew our attention to this was an article by Samuel James. He wrote an article entitled – let's pull up the title here.
I've got it if you want me to go.
The Young, Restless Reformed Movement Wasn't Enough, but It Wasn't a Mistake. So let's talk first of all about what is the Young, Restless Reformed movement that he's talking about.
Sure. As I understand it, and you probably have more context to this, is probably in the early 2000s, sort of the coming together of young men who were energetic in church planting and a desire to see God's kingdom grow and assembled around Reformed theology. And we saw this movement begin, and things that popped out of it were things like Together for the Gospel Coalition, as well as a number of personalities came out in the midst of this. There were a number of rock stars, still are rock stars.
Let's qualify evangelical rock stars.
Evangelical rock stars.
Yes.
Led to, in some sense, a revival throughout the country, at least in North America.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that I don't know if Colin Hansen is the one who coined the title "Young, Restless, and Reformed," but he wrote a book that describes the emergence of this movement, and this author Samuel James is basically in connection with this being the last Together for the Gospel conference, is kind of reflecting on this movement. And I'll just sort of lay out actually before we get that, why was the Young, Restless Reform movement so popular? Like, why do you think it took off?
So I kind of came in midstream. I wasn't there at the beginning, but I think it was in part responding to maybe some of the movements of the emergent church through the 90s and some of the more seeker-sensitive movements, or at least that's how I read it. A group of men who were interested in theology and those sorts of things, as well as like one thing that the Young Restless Reform movement did well is they did really pleasing aesthetics, right? like the graphics are just stunning for just about everything. And so I think that is in part, and it had some great thinkers and leaders at the helm.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? Because you were in it sooner than I was.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I sort of watched it emerge and develop. And I think what it seemed to do is unite. You had people who were disillusioned with some of the shallowness of what was going on in evangelicalism. Some of the sort of seeker-sensitive church growth, like gospel light, pragmatic kind of approaches to Christian life and ministry. And you had people who started to latch on to figures like John Piper and even Lig Duncan and John MacArthur and some of these, and they began. And when those individuals started to partner together for gospel initiatives, to put on conferences and to facilitate different gospel initiatives, and in particular with the formation of the Gospel Coalition, you saw that there was this kind of explosive growth of a renewed interest in Reformed theology and a renewed sense of, well, you might be Presbyterian, I might be Baptist, but like we can agree on the central essence of the gospel, and we can fellowship together, partner together for advancement. And I think the internet was a massive factor in that, where you were able to connect with others and get exposed to the teaching of others that was not as accessible to you in the 90s, for example.
Yeah.
So, I think that's a good place to start. So
I think the internet's a big piece of that.
Yeah.
We were even talking about Together for the Gospel this year being live streamed out to everybody, right?
Yeah. So this article, and I've tried to summarize his thesis. It's a short article. We'll post it in the show notes. I mean, this is not one of these David Brooks think pieces. This is a short. It'll take you 3 minutes to read it, 3-4 minutes to read it. It's not even that long, probably, depending on your reading speed.
It was refreshing.
Yeah.
Something of that length. Yeah.
I've tried to summarize his thesis as this: the young, restless, Reformed movement was never enough, but it also wasn't a mistake. And he goes on to note that tensions over Trump and race have irrevocably split the movement apart. So first, do you agree with that assessment of the young, restless, Reformed movement?
Yes. I think it's probably how do I feel about this? I think it was Trump first and then race. I think it was that division took place and then that led to more divisions. Like I think that was the initial big fracture, and then lots of other fractures springing off of that. And I think race is one of those. He mentions Ferguson in there, which I think is 2014.
Yeah.
But I don't think Ferguson. I did not feel the fracture of Ferguson as much. Like I was surprised to see that in the article.
Yeah, that might be. It might be an interest. Yeah, you might see that as sort of the initial kind of. If you think of the kind of like analogy of a dam, like the initial like small crack in the dam that then later events related to race just like blew that thing open.
Yeah,
and now it's a gushing hole as opposed to a crack that was leaking water.
Yeah.
So
and you're putting your finger in it, and then another one comes open.
And basically, what James is arguing here is he's saying, look, if those two things didn't happen, this would not be the last T4G.
I agree with that.
I agree with that as well. And I think, like, I remember. Do you remember the 2018 T4G conference? That was the one where there was some discussion of racial issues, and that was controversial.
I don't think I was at that one.
Okay. Yeah, I remember that one, and I think part of what was so striking about that was that you could tell things were beginning to like that was where I'm like, wow, there's actually controversy here this year. Like There was never controversy before, really, of any significance. But you could just feel when certain issues were talked about in the room. Like they had a whole panel on Martin Luther King Jr. And discussing his legacy and race and those sorts of things. And you could just feel the tension in the room over this. And so I do think that between the election of Trump and the racial tensions, that's why Together for the Gospel is coming to an end, which is sad. Which is sad, I think, in many respects. But
yeah, and I know I've had friends who would attend, and if we could, would attend Together for the Gospel and would attend the Gospel Coalition. It was often seen as the same crowd, right? That one year you would go to Together for the Gospel, and the next year you would go to the Gospel Coalition. They were an every other year conference,
right?
And I have friends that would have gone to both of these, going like, goodness, I don't like where the Gospel Coalition is on race or politics or this or that, and therefore I'm not going to go.
Right. Yeah. So in this article, James identifies 3 benefits of the Young Restless Reformed movement and then identifies 3 flaws. He highlights as benefits that it infused spiritual vitality in evangelicalism. I think that's obviously true. I'd be hard-pressed to argue that, even if you didn't like it.
Yeah, I think it's hard to find an evangelical church that would not be influenced by this in some way.
Yes. Either as on board with it or there are pockets of evangelicalism that are
against it.
In like response to it. Yeah.
Sure.
It connected pastors and others who felt isolated. That's huge. And obviously the internet facilitated that significantly.
Yeah. Have you ever heard Jared Wilson at Midwestern, his story? I believe he's a pastor in Vermont and was feeling isolated and got connected through the internet to a bunch of these other guys. And it revitalized his ministry there, caused him to get I think a doctorate and got him eventually all the way to Midwestern.
Yeah. And that makes sense when you consider like the number of pastors. Pastoral ministry can feel very isolating in and of itself, and pastors can easily feel like, well, there's no one I can really open up to in my congregation.
Sure,
because the things that I'm struggling with or frustrated about pertain directly to people in the congregation that I can't violate confidence or that sort of thing. So. And you're hesitant probably or maybe don't have anybody in your immediate area that you're like, we're pretty much like-minded, and so I could kind of open up to that person. So I think that was huge in connecting pastors and beginning to form some of those relational connections for that. And that it produced an explosion of resources.
Absolutely.
I think it is hard to even begin to catalog the explosion of resources in these areas in terms of books and conferences and online content and websites and all that sort of stuff where pastors can now go, or even the average layperson can go and find really substantive, good, solid teaching and resources and help. So,
yeah, a couple of things. One thing that came along with this, maybe it came out a few years before this movement began, but I would say the ESV Bible.
ESV. Well, and in particular, I would say the ESV Study Bible.
Study Bible,
yes.
Yeah. Came along right as this movement was getting going and became sort of the hallmark scripture.
The go-to translation.
Yep.
Yeah, that's true.
And then the other thing is you go to a conference like Together for the Gospel, and they give you 12 to 15 newly published books as a part of this movement.
Yep.
And that's just wild to me that every other year you could come up with, well, we've limited it to 12 or 15 books that we think are influential.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, he also notes 3 flaws. First, development of a celebrity preacher-teacher culture, 100%.
Yep. There was a whole podcast about this this past summer. I don't know if you remember.
What was it? What was it called again?
I think it was called the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill Church. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And that continues to exist even though I think a number of the leading figures within the sort of young Restless Reformed crowd speak out against it.
Mm-hmm.
And yet sometimes I feel like maybe there are additional things they could do to try to undercut that a little bit more than happens. And, I think some of the guys involved in that are utterly indifferent to platform or to following. They I just want to preach the gospel and, But I think there are some others who have gone out of their way to cultivate a platform and a following.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's been an interesting thing there. Side note, this actually gets at one of my biggest pet peeves about Together for the Gospel. Do you know what it is?
That they don't announce who's speaking what session?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
To sort of combat some of that?
Yes. Spoiler alert, every single person you're putting up on the stage is a big name. They are.
Yeah.
I could understand that if it was we've sprinkled in 2 or 3 guys that you've probably never heard of. One guy's a faithful pastor of a church in Arkansas, pastors 100 people, just a faithful guy. We think you'll be blessed by hearing from him. Here's another guy from Idaho. You've never heard of him, pastors a church of 175 people, but he's faithful. You'll be blessed by him. And we're mixing him in with Mark Dever, Lig Duncan, Al Mohler, and David Platt.
Mm-hmm.
Well, of course you'd be a little concerned about, maybe guys would skip out on, the no-name preacher. But all those guys are names.
Yeah.
Please just treat me like an adult. Anyway. Second flaw, reliance on pastors and ministry models who were growing. So even though I think there's a sense in which the Young Restless Reform movement was a response to some of the excesses of the church growth movement, the seeker-sensitive model, there was still such an emphasis on growing, then that's how you got your platform, and then that's how you were then gaining prominence within this movement.
Yeah, and I think some of those are guys borrowing from some of the church growth guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And then lastly, the tendency within the movement to rely on the back channel instead of strong leadership. What do you think of that one?
I was confused by that one. I didn't fully understand it. I was hoping you could explain it to me.
Well, I think to me this sounds like a subtle, not so subtle, dig at the Gospel Coalition and how they handled the James MacDonald stuff and him leaving the Gospel Coalition network, and as well as even Driscoll. That with a couple of exceptions, looking at you, John MacArthur, that leaders within Gospel Coalition were hesitant to take decisive action when it sure from the outside seemed like it needed to be taken. So in specifically dealing with Driscoll and with James MacDonald. So,
guys who are clearly out of control.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So it's an interesting article. But here's my biggest takeaway. Here's what I so appreciate about this article. We live in a especially if you think of social media context, something is either all bad or all good. We've lost the ability to say, okay, this thing right here has a lot of good stuff to it, but there's also some bad stuff to it. But noting that there's bad stuff doesn't mean that we can't appreciate there was really good stuff that came with this. And saying that there's really good stuff about this doesn't mean that we're blind to it had flaws. We've lost the ability to do that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't think anybody does that. Well, we could be a lot better about that as a society at large.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this article does do a good job of that, even in its title.
Yes. Yeah, and I think even the title gets at this in the sense that ultimately, the Young Restless Reform movement was at some level a spontaneous – it's not like three guys sat down and were like, we're going to plan this new movement. It's going to be called this. It did emerge organically to a large degree, I think. But as is the case with any movement, even within evangelicalism, it cannot replace the local church.
Mm-hmm.
And so inevitably, at its best, it was never intended to replace the local church. It was intended to help the local church, to provoke it to grow in certain ways. And so this is where you know the celebrity culture stuff comes in that people being more interested in what some random person on the internet says is this is false teaching and this is not, versus their pastor that they know and trust. And I won't go into examples on air, but I know specific examples where you've got people who will find stuff online like, oh, that person's a false teacher because they were on some list. And they go to their pastor, and the pastor's like, no, I don't think that's true at all. I've read that material, and that's not – they've been sort of guilt by association. And instead of listening to their pastor that they know loves them and is sharp theologically and is a good thinker, they believe some random blogger who, they don't know from Adam.
Yeah.
That's just mind-blowing to me.
Yeah. Better blogger than Twitter user, or something like that. Yeah, like your example's very mid to early 2000s, right? With a blogger they're trusting or something like that. I know there's still bloggers out there, right?
Maybe website's a better term than blogger in terms of like the whole, discernment blogger, discernment website kind of thing. So, other thoughts on Young Restless Reformed, the end of T4G?
Yeah, my joke was that Young Restless Reformed was really middle-aged, tired, and reformed. The movement really grew up. Guys that –
that's what it is now. It started young, restless, and reformed.
I even think when I became a part of it, I think I was on the coattails. I think my first Gospel Coalition was 2010. 10 or 12. Or no, Gospel Coalition
11. Was odd years.
I think it would have been 11.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because 2009 I was still a undergraduate student. So
is that the one in Chicago that you went?
I went to one in Chicago.
Yeah.
And then they had a couple in Orlando, the wilderness years.
Yes.
And then
years of exile.
Yeah. And then it's been in Indianapolis ever since.
Yeah.
So yeah. I feel like when I came on board, I think I've always felt like, oh, these guys are like 10, 15 years ahead of me. And I'm just sort of the young guy trying to soak it all in while I can.
Yeah. Yeah. There is a sense in which the Young Restless Reform movement has evolved into middle-aged, cranky, and still
reformed.
Largely reformed, yeah.
Yeah.
So, just fascinating to see how that's developed and emerged, and now is, arguably on the decline, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
and we'll see what's next, if there is something next.
Well, I mean, Gospel Coalition, in terms of conferences and things like that, the website, that still seems to be going strong.
Yeah.
Even though there's plenty of criticism directed at Gospel Coalition. But T4G was never intended to be an organization. It was intended to be a loose network of people associated with each other. Gospel Coalition is a formal organization with employees and a website and a much more coherent and intentional model of ministry.
Oh, yeah.
As opposed to T4G. It's just like, we do this conference every couple of years, and
that's
we try
really
to
it.
We really try. I mean, we try to resource people. You could get your name connected with, if you're looking for a church that's sympathetic to T4G, like you could get your church's name on there. So if you're looking for a church that loosely aligns with T4G guys, you could do that. But we should be moving on here, John. We will talk a little bit. Once we get back from the conference, we'll do a whole episode on reflections and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. We ready to do Today in Sports History?
Yeah, let's do it.
April the 12th.
Let's do it.
1960, Bill Veeck and the Chicago –
It's actually pronounced Vec, I believe.
Is it Vec?
Mm-hmm. I know it's spelled funny, but –
and Chicago Comiskey Park debut, the exploding scoreboard. I have zero clue what that means.
I'm not sure either. I just thought it was funny. Like I don't know if that's just like fireworks that like shoot off from the scoreboard.
You see, I thought it was like
the actual scoreboard itself just blew up.
Yeah, I thought something happened. Like I thought this was a tragedy. But it says debuts, so
no, very intentional. Bill Veeck was one of those like innovative. Let's change the game. Let's try to improve it,
jazz it up.
Yeah.
1980, the U.S. Olympic Committee endorses a boycott of the Moscow Olympic Games.
Yeah.
Feels timely.
It does. Yeah, I imagine if there were Olympics to be held in Moscow this upcoming summer, there'd be some boycotting as well. Yeah.
1998, 62nd U.S. Masters Tournament. Mark O'Meara claims his first major title with birdie on 18 to win by one stroke over David Duval and Freddie Couples.
Yeah.
Mark O'Meara. I haven't heard that name in a long time.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that was you were what, like 10?
Yeah, I was 10 years old. Not quite. I was 9. My birthday was coming up in a couple weeks.
Okay. Yeah.
2015, the 79th U.S. Masters Tournament. Jordan Spieth leads wire-to-wire to win his first major title by 4 strokes from Phil Mickelson and Justin Rose.
Yes. Yeah. Those were there were other Masters ones I could have thrown in there.
Sure. We're right in that wheelhouse. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. What do you like?
I mean, part of me for the laughs and giggles wants to go with the exploding scoreboard.
Yeah.
But it doesn't feel very significant.
Yeah, and part of me for like the clicks and the SEO makes me want to go boycott Moscow. And our show title would get us a lot of clicks.
There you go. I don't have a strong inclination here.
Neither do I. Let's do Mark O'Meara.
Okay.
That feels good to me.
Okay. One thing you liked.
One thing I liked, actually something I discovered this morning, there is a podcast, and I've listened to a single episode, so take that for what it's worth, but it's a Monday, Wednesday, Friday podcast called Pour Over Podcast, and it's 5 minutes of news and events and interspersed with like, yes, this may be going on to the world, but let's remember what the promises of God says in Psalms, X, Y, and Z, with sort of interspersed. And I thought there was a helpful balance this morning. So, the Pour Over Pod, and it's all done in like coffee lingo, which helps. But all right, let's get our espresso shots this morning, and they do some quick hits, and
okay. So just to summarize, we've got coffee as the overarching kind of meta narrative / metaphor being used.
The framing device, if you will.
There you go. You've got current events.
Yeah.
And you've got scriptural encouragement.
Mm-hmm.
I'm struggling to come up – if there were a sports element to that, I would think, did John design another podcast that –
they did talk the Masters this morning.
Okay.
So that was one of the news pieces.
Okay. For me, this past weekend, our oldest son, John, turned 24. Well, he turned 24 earlier in the week, but we got to celebrate this past weekend. So it was good to have him visiting us from the Indianapolis area. Good to hang out with him. And I feel officially old having a son who's 24.
Yeah.
Very old. So
I'm sorry. I don't know what to say to you. I would feel old too.
I used to be part of the young Restless Reformed.
Yeah.
Now I'm definitely in the middle-aged portion of the program here. So In any case, we have talked a good bit of sports. We've talked young, restless, reformed. We've talked Mark O'Meara winning the Masters in 1998. We've talked about a podcast that seems particularly made for John Sloat himself. And we've talked about my oldest son's birthday. So I think by definition, we have covered our various and sundry topics. So I think all that's left to say is until next time, the Lord bless y'all real good.
Later.